transplant, and then we got very low-end technology surface drip and turned it on, and it allows to drip from the top down. And then over this, you can put a mulch, wood bark, and what have you to keep your evaporation losses out. And these are the response after just 1 and 2 years. So when I was there last November, the plants were this high. And so I got a chance out of their generosity to sample carrots, beets, lettuce, and all that. And it was a beautiful thing to see that under minimal skill, with an understanding of soil health, made a deserty soil under the horrifying conditions grow crops in November, December, January, February, March. You see that they have to farm opposite than us because the summers are too hot. In the summer, you could put a ground cover or some very drought tolerant, heat tolerant plant just to protect the ground. But in the winters, when you grow crops, you see how an understanding of soil health was implemented in a desert with completely destroyed soils. So the desert wasn't an issue for growing plants, right? That's my point on it. So we've gone from a desert to the top of the mountains to organic farming here and what have you. And we'll see a few more slides. Okay. This here is the Les Combs Vineyard. This is the largest vineyard in New Mexico. It's around 15 minutes southeast of Würzburg. And go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I have a question. So do you rely most completely on manure and compost to inoculate your soil, or do you like cultivate iRobes as well?
Cultivate what again?
The microorganisms?
No, yeah, well, there's many ways. In this example here, you know how I said we wetted and then fractured with a pitchfork, and then we put the compost and the manure, and then we rake it in thoroughly so that the compost and the manure are intimately mixed with that sandy, dead soil. You see how I did, but we mixed it only like in the top inch. But if you had a rototiller, you could have mixed it in much deeper, 2 or 3 inches, but we don't ever want to mix the soil too deep with anything because we're trying to bring life to the living part of the living skin on the surface because that regulates water infiltration, gas exchange. And so we only want to make sure that we begin healing the top skin of the soil because from there the soil will begin building into the deeper part. So there's many ways of doing it. So I'm not trying to debate your point. It depends on what you're trying to do and what have you, but the principles will all follow here, right? Diversity and compost and what have you. So there's many ways of doing it. The most important part is you should follow the principles of diversity that we talked about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of.
But so do you guys I'm just wondering, do you use bokashi or anything, or do you just get all the microorganisms from the compost and manure?
I like getting them primarily from the high quality compost and manure, and you can always buy. In some cases, you might have a soil that has no more beneficial mycorrhizal fungi. The soils have never been farmed or they never had that. And beneficial mycorrhizal fungi play an extremely important role in the soil of extracting water and communicating with the other plants. And so many times you can do on a really bad soils, you can inoculate the seeds with mycorrhizal spores and other beneficial microbes. So the list it's really endless. It's what locally can you do and can you afford and can you begin your journey. But there's many ways it's following those principles. So this orchard here, for those who haven't tried wine, and I do like trying wine, this folks produce extremely high quality yielding and very quality tasting wine. And they now have gone into where they're growing the natural vegetation. When it grows this tall, they mow it and they return it back. And when they prune these plants are on this high. When we did on a video, Connor, remind me and I'll send it to you so you can share with your folks.
Will do.
You'll see this year and a couple of months ago how folks are doing this kind of stuff using soil health. But this plant here, when they prune them, they make you prune grapes, and when they're this tall, they produce a lot of biomass, and so they get in it and they're thrown right on the top here. And then when they're shredded, when they're shredding the grass, all the woody material and stuff of the prunings, in about 2-3 weeks, the stuff is beginning to get decomposed because the biology is so active on the surface. You see that everything that was pruned returned back to the soil, and that will go back to the microbes and return back to the plant, including the cover crop on the natural grasses here. When you graze them, all you do is you're feeding the biology on it, and then the under here is drip tape around about 6-8 inches, and the grape plants will come and grow under here, and they will get their water and their nutrients that is being decomposed by all those residues, and so the grape plant is receiving the nutrients from the decomposition process of residues. Can you see that? On top of this is that every year he applies a top dress of a high quality compost to keep the regeneration, keep it inoculated and the carbon cycles going. But here's my point. He's able to grow 8 to 10 tons per acre. In some of the areas he's grown as well as 14 tons. But for those of you that are not familiar with great vineyards and what have you, especially the vineyards from north, there's a lot of vineyards in Taos and different areas. Some of your folks that grow vineyards will say, well, I was only able to produce 3 to 4 tons, and they'll consider that a good year. Can you see then that if you go to an ecological based system, that the quality of grapes and the quantity and the volume, it will always be best under a system that is ecologically based. It also will be the one that requires the least chemicals. You have a healthy plant, you don't need to hit it hard with fungicides and what have you. These are pruned in such a way that you can see, you see that there's no plants growing right under the white. The reason for that is that a grape plant cannot have a lot of humidity because it'll spark fungus disease. But we were able to, with their skill on the Lescon, they pruned them to make sure that air could always go under the plants and come out and maintain aeration and ventilation so the humidity will not get high enough to hit the plant. At the same time, the plants are high, photosynthesizing, right? And the ground before is covered with this grass, cover crops and what have you. So it still has all the principles of soil health, and it was dealt with specifically to make sure that you would not get fungal diseases. So we were able to manage that by just understanding that process. And again, I said when these videos come out, we did 3 of them. One of them on this is a fantastic video because of it showcases some very high quality wines grown in the desert and all the people that he employs and all the benefits that come when it's done locally. Everyone can now, after we've been talking about a healthy soil, everyone can see on the range, right? This is for New Mexico. Everyone can see that we want this and we don't want this. After a heavy rainfall, the next day at 100 degrees, it'll be dry. You say, where's all the rainfall? It hit the soil, it couldn't infiltrate, the soil was collapsed, it runs off, and any moisture that it did wet, by the next day at 100 degrees, low humidity, it'll evaporate, and you're saying, well, where's the moisture? So it'll do you no good to say, well, I'm going to pray for rain and this, that, and the other. I'm not saying that to practice. If you do not manage your soil to capture the moisture for it to go inside, you won't maximize a rain event. So in a deserty soil like us, you have to use management at the highest level or you cannot solve the problems because they're all management based. Okay, this one is one we did 10 years ago. This is the Rio Grande Community Farms. These soils have been farmed in that area for at least several hundred years. And in this specific case, these soils have been mower plowed, ripped, laser level for many decades. At the time that we did this little demonstration 10 years ago, we took a sample of soil that had been farmed conventionally. That means a lot of tillage, a lot of fertilizer, what have you. And we got a clod of this soil and we put it in water and it immediately fell apart because it had no integrity, right? And you want to show you a photo of it in white. We planted a cover crop of 8 different cover crops, grasses, legumes, and brassicas, and they only grew for 5 weeks. At the time that this died, in the middle of November, we got hit with a real hard frost to kill the plants. I went the previous day before I did that and I took a sample of the soil. And though that soil had been beaten up for decades, it only took 5 months for the soil to become back to life with a diversity of plants as the microbes got all kinds of organic compounds and began making water-stable aggregates. You can't get healthy soil unless you have diverse plants, and the diverse plants communicate with all the microorganisms to make your soil healthy. Okay, so you can't make the soil healthy unless you do it.
Just to point out this, it's just like trees that please with Michael,
Right?
with his soil. It was just pure dead, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And so our friend Michael Melendres, he's a really well-known expert for his understanding on mycorrhizal fungi and humic substances and what have you. So he applied this to soil that is considered one of the worst soils that are called saline soil. They're very high in sodium and salinity, and they're really horrifying soils to reclaim. But he was able to reclaim it on his farm using an understanding of mycorrhiza and organisms to restructure the soil on a soil that most farmers would never farm. What can everyone see here is that soil health regeneration occurs really, really quick, even after having over 100 years of beating the living hell out of it with disking, plowing, fertilizers. So you see that the soil regenerates real quick. And this is just one of many examples that we've seen. Okay, the other part here is that, again, I took this test about 10 years ago in my east side of El Paso. And you can see here that they didn't want the soil here growing any crops because the sprinklers are there and grass is blocking the spray as it's going out, right? So they would hit it with a herbicide and what have you. So I went and I took a picture of this sandy soil. Can you see that it came from right in here? Can you see that it's sandy soil? Now look at what happened when the natural orchard grass grew and it took it out of the soil. You see, this was like 0 to 8 inch depth. Everywhere along one of these roots, the sand, silt, and clay was beginning to clump as the microorganisms were feeding off the roots. the organic compounds that they released, and they were getting the sand, silt, and clay and clumping them and turning them back into soil. So you see that a living root is necessary to have a healthy soil. And you see then that the most important part, you see those three rings, biological, physical, and chemical. What does that mean? That we see this is a worldwide process or phenomenon. If I have a living plant, the biology of the plant, the roots, and the microbes always rule the day. You want a healthy system, you have to have living systems. So when you want a soil physical that is well structured and well aggregated, it has to come from biology and living roots and organisms. Okay, so that's how we got the physical. The biology makes the house possible. If you now want the most optimal chemical and biochemical, all the stuff that goes on in the soil solution, remember we talked about enormous mind-boggling diversity that you can't see with your eye? They do all the work of making the plants fertile, producing hormones, vitamins, structuring the soil, and it's endless. So if you want the most optimal chemical and more importantly biochemical to take place in the soil solution that you can't see with your eye, it has to be in an environment where the physical was well aggregated. And if you want the environment to be well aggregated soil structure, you have to have living plants that are managed right to make that. So you see that if I want to get optimal biological, physical, and chemical properties in an ecological setting, I got to get the biology and its management right because it drives the whole system. So you can never replace and say, well, I don't care about the grass and I'm just going to till the hell out of it and do what I want. And you can bypass the biology, you'll have a destroyed system. And if you don't like what the plants and all that are doing, you say, well, you know, I'm not really interested in here if I was to magnify and see this invisible jungle and all things it does. You say, well, I don't care about that because I don't understand. I'm just going to apply fertilizer and pesticides to crash the system. And then that system comes with consequences. So how many of you guys know that enormous amount of wind, water erosion, runoff, pollution, nitrates in the Gulf, in the Chesapeake Bay? This is a worldwide problem. Where does that come from? If you do not farm at optimal conditions, you remove the ability for the soil to process all these chemicals to stay in place, right? And I'm talking about biological chemicals versus inorganic pesticides, fertilizers, and stuff like that. You see where we're getting our issues from? We have polluted air. Where did all that wind erosion come from? The surfaces that were not protected in front of it. We have chemicals running off into the Gulf, and this is all over the world, or at least into the water tables. Where did it come from? You see that in a healthy system, you wouldn't generate the chemicals. If I'm showing you, like I showed you, Minor Morgan's farm here, and the other example, if I'm using little to no inputs or no chemicals, then you can have little to no chemicals leaving the system, right? Because you rely on the ecology to run the show. My friend Dr. David Johnson, he's known all over the world in NMSU for producing one of the best compost diversity that we know today. As far as I know, I've been doing this all my life. I don't know anyone that can produce compost that can make cover crops grow 14 feet tall. And he was able to rejuvenate this background soil, dead soil, sandy soil, in 3.5 years. So you want to misspell, you want to get rid of a lot of myths where you say, well, it takes 1,000 years to make an inch of soil. None of that's true. That it was, when those statements were done by a lot of our soil scientists, they didn't understand it from a biological, ecological. They just thought they studied it from a geological, and they said it takes time, slow, this, that, and the other. But you see then that a soil has regenerated using a superior microbially diverse fungal dominant compost. So I'm not going to go any further than this because you can easily type in Dr. David Johnson's no-turn bioreactor, no-turn composting system. He has YouTubes that show you how to make this. It's extremely easy, very few resources, and it produces, again, as far as we know, the most potent and diverse compost there is. These are all the different tools that you can use. Diversity, proper grazing, right? All the principles, using high quality compost. There's many things that anyone can do at any scale, anywhere in the world, and that's the main emphasis that I want to show up here. And this is a farm, again, probably like 10 years old, of a person in the Velarde area planting a mixture of cover crops before planting the chili. Those cover crops in there, by the time they prep the fields, the soil has a lot of organic matter and biology, so when they plant the green chili, it grows much better. You see that the green chili is growing into an environment full of organic compounds and biology.
So when she planted that,
Yeah.
then mow it to
They-
plant the chili in?
Right. They mowed it. In this case, they did light tillage, and here's the point in this kind of a furrow irrigated cropping system. Minimum tillage to prep the fields and to make your furrows. You get all that benefit of the roots and the biology and the biomass. When you plant the chili, it responds to all biology that's in there. And again, one of many different ways on how you can do it.
Since it's just mowed, like the grasses are like still there,
Yeah.
even when the chili's growing.
No, they're killed because you would kill the root cap.
Like, so it's like mowed, like flat enough that
Right, yeah.
it dies.
Yeah, and so you're basically terminating the plant.
Making it into compost,
And
basically.
so you have all the violets, all the leaves and stems above, but more importantly, you have an enormous amount of roots that never got disc or ripped really because they grow deep, right? And we only disturb the soil on the top. So you still get, so when the chili plant grows, it's getting all the benefit of all the biology and roots that are rotting in place from the previous one. Yeah. Okay, another one that's an outstanding example here, this is by Bosque right down here by Los Lunas. This is my friend Mike Smith. As far as I know, he's the only one from a big part of the Southwest that feeds his dairy cows strictly on rotation of cover crops and pastures. And when you go out there, and we've done a number of workshops with him, I always ask him, I go, what led to that? He goes, well, it led to that. If I didn't make changes, we just could not make profit on the milk using conventional systems. So he does cover crops and he grazes them. That's him asking this question. I go, what is your veterinary bill for maintaining the health of the cows? He goes, before we went from the conventional to this soil health, he goes, my biggest bill was keeping the cows healthy because, the situation allows them to get much more sicknesses and what have you. And I go, how much is it now? He goes, we essentially don't have any health issues. And he goes, because healthy, what does it say here? Healthy soils produce healthy plants, produce healthy cows, and he does it economically, regeneratively, and you can see them. It just makes sense, right? How could it be any other way? Some professor friends here in the Clovis area that are trying different types of brassicas and cover crops. And these soils are highly erodible in the Clovis area and what have you. Look at how quickly the legumes and the roots and earthworms are coming after just one season of cover crops. So you see the benefit that's coming about before you plant a cash crop, you've got to work on conditioning the soil. What?
I just realized I've never explained what brassica is.
There you have like mustards, radishes, and all that. They're a different type. It's different than like wheat, oat, barley, triticale, right? That's a grass plant.
It's the family?
And it's a type of what would be the proper what type of label that? Brassicas are your radishes, turnips, and stuff like that. Canola, rape, and this. They're just plants that they're known for this main thing is that they don't associate with beneficial mycorrhiza. But enough to say is that we're talking about the main different types of plants that are put in the field. And what we're showing here on this highly erodible land is that, do you see that these soils previously were not planted into cover crops? It was just cotton, and then they would till it and leave it alone and plant cotton the next year. Once they had diversity and cover, do you see how quickly the biology is coming back to a soil that's highly erodible? And this is a learning curve in this area because this is basically brand new for that area. So this is trial and error on figuring out what kind of mixes does it take so that when you do plant corn or cotton or whatever, is the soil much more biologically active. Okay, this is a friend of mine, she's a researcher and up there in Taos, and she teaches a lot of wetland, forest ecology and all that, and so I went to visit her site there as we were working on different collaborations and what have you. And this is Taos, New Mexico, very short growing season, high elevation and what have you. But she has a combination of greenhouses, hoop houses, high quality compost, and diversity of plants in a small piece of land. And the neat thing about this is that there's a water table under all of this thing of like 1.5 feet. So do you see that it didn't take a lot of healthy, very productive soil, properly irrigated with drip to manage a foot of soil, and then the water table is right under? You'd have to be careful not to drown the roots out because it would become anaerobic. But again, my point here is we went from one of the largest orchards, right, pecan, the vineyards, with grazing, crops, cover crops and all that, to any scale, small scale growing food locally using soil health principles, requiring no inputs like chemicals and fertilizers and stuff like that. Another photo of the type of grazing we do in the mountains. Okay, this is a young farmer that Minor Morgan and myself have been training. He's probably in his early 30s. And he's only been 5 years of mentoring under Minor and myself and what have you. And he's already gotten the technique down. Diversity, compost, drip, fabric mulch, hoop houses, and all that. And so when he's a very, very talented person. So when we do a lot of workshops with our folks and others, we go over to his site and people say, in one piece of land, enormous diversity of crops, cool season, warm season, cover crops, minimum to no tillage, very, very little tillage. Using greenhouses, hoop houses, bees, and all that, and fruit trees now he's bringing in. But can everyone see that, right here in Los Ranchos, that he is mimicking and making his own small-scale ecosystem so that all the biology can function there? So he does really well in it, and of course he's one of our number of our younger producers that is training other producers and say, hey, a lot of our folks with the challenges that we're facing worldwide, we don't have decades to figure out how we're going to deal with the issues we're dealing with. Right now, I read a paper the other day that in the next 30 years, we'll have to produce 70% more food than we're doing now under a planet that's under enormous strain. So how are you going to do that? Here's one way. Do it locally, sell locally, produce quality products with none of the chemical doing and pass the knowledge to someone else. And in this case, don't take 20, 30 years to learn it. He's learned the basic concept in 5 years. You see what we're talking about? And that's what we're talking about on this concept of soil health. Okay, another example of that's how our arranged land should be. In the majority, it should be covered and properly grazed and managed, because this is not only for our cows, our horses, our sheep, goats, and all that. This is for all the wildlife and all the beneficials that live there. So you need a healthy ecosystem because you have to account for all the other critters that are not your livestock. These are a variety of cover crops grown in the plant material centers for our friend Bernadette Cooney. And my point here is that a lot of work has already been done by the plant material centers with NRCS and New Mexico State University with Dr. Johnny Doe and Dr. Kupashan Gover and all that, and the folks the researchers in the Clovis area. We already know a lot about which cultivars and varieties of cover crops already grow because they've been proven. They'll tell you this variety grew this tall, and this one, just a different cultivar grew this tall, so you choose the bigger one, right? So it's not like we're needing tons and tons of research. We already know a lot. Anybody can do a lot of the personal planning and say, I can get there. I'm going to have to do some thinking. I'm going to have to use some ecological perspective. But I can do this. We just showed you the previous farmer 5 years, and he's really pretty much got it packed down. Okay, I'm going to now cover here with a review, and then maybe just ask you a few questions. Okay, so everyone agree on the principles? What are the principles? Diversity, right?
Maximize biodiversity.
Yes. And the other part, living roots, right? Because we want to capture the sun.
Minimize
And-
disturbance.
And then minimal disturbance of biological, physical, and chemical, because it destroys the invisible biology, right? And then we said cover the soil at all times with living plants and living resin, right? We protect the house. That's the living skin. And then we zoomed into the circle and say, why are you doing all this stuff? Because the majority of the biological organisms you can't see with your eye. They're the most diverse communities that we know of on our terrestrial system. You're protecting the very things you can't see. They do all the work. So when you want clean air, clean water, nutrient-dense foods, healthy animals, healthy plants, pollinators, and you say, I want all these benefits, where do they come from? Microorganisms, right? And very complex food chains. I'm not leaving out all the rest. I'm not leaving out earthworms, pollinators. They're all very critical, and those you can see with your eye and say, yeah, that's a no-brainer. I flat out know I want those in there. The hard part is when you're working in this thing of sustainable farming is that the majority of the folks that we work with that do this, they weren't aware that the biology in the realm of the invisible to our eyes, they would say, well, why would I care about that? That leads to using practices where you're devastating the biology because you didn't know you were supposed to take care of it. So if you were to set your number one top priority and you say, I want to grow fruit trees, I want to do bees, I want to do flowers, I want to grow garlic or whatever, or you want to grow rabbits, sheep, goats, and all that, what would be your number one priority based on what we covered today? And I gave you 20 examples in New Mexico, and there's many more. What did all these farmers do as their top priority before they began their soil health journey? How did they begin? They came to an understanding that if you do not feed and protect the diversity of the realm that's invisible, you didn't choose the right priority. If you choose any other priority, you chose the wrong priority, right? Because if you say, well, I want to grow beef, right? Healthy cows or sheep, goats, or I want to grow cherries or garlic and all that, you better have your priority that you needed healthy biological organisms, or you can't have the beef at the level that you want it economically. You see that if I do not choose if I don't choose the priority, you'll make the wrong decision. That goes back to biology dominates the whole system. Okay, so all of us now are in agreement that the soil health principles, the living plants, capturing the sun, sending energy into the soil to feed on it. What does it do that's predictable in all the fields that I showed you? And this goes on globally. If I have a healthy soil, what will these roots here? This is a high magnification. You see the little roots and all organic compounds leaking out, this is referred as the rhizosphere, nothing but a fancy word for the roots. And we're talking about the small roots, the majority you can see. In this area, it'll be releasing all kinds of sugars, and it'll be feeding an enormous diversity of biology that you can't see, right? So the roots is the number one thing you need. You need a diversity of them, and you need to be harvesting the sun. And so the roots, in association with enormous diversity, produce the next sphere, and we call it aggregates. So you see that if I look at the sand and all the particles of sand, something they got clumped together, because all those organic compounds and microbes got the sand silt and clay minerals, and they clumped them, they turned it into a big house. That's a macro aggregate. So our scientists like to use fancy words like that. So all this means is that it's well aggregated. All this means is you have living roots with biology. So what happens when the soil gets well aggregated and it becomes dark, rich, and humus? What does it do to the soil? It makes it porous. It makes the soil, and we call it porous. All we did was give it a lot of empty spaces from the spaces between aggregates and the spaces to where earthworms have tunneled through or where a root has decayed. So the soil becomes porous automatically when you go to soil health. Okay. How do we protect this earth castle? The reason I call this earth castle is not to just bring in a fancy name or what have you, is that the majority of mankind still today will call that dirt or soil or a bed. Soil scientists will call it a bed. Do you see what a misnomer it is when you look at soil and you say, well, I don't see why you're making such a big deal of this. The reason we're making a big deal of it is that the most complex systems of biology and interactions is taking place at a scale that you can't see, unless you're trained to see it under a microscope and understand it. You see why I refer to it as a earth castle or a palace? Because now you're going to say, hey, my job is to build the health and structure to accommodate the world's most diverse ecosystem, right? Now it won't be just soil or a bed or sandstone or dirt. You'll give it a healthy perspective. So what do we do with living plants in the detritus, the different levels we're doing? We have put a living roof on top of the house. And that is moderating it so that the water doesn't evaporate and so that the temperatures don't get too hot. It keeps the soil porous so that oxygen diffuses in the soil and goes into the soil solution, and carbon dioxide comes out as respiration from the roots and the microbes. It does many things. My goal here is not to cover all the things that it does, just to tell you that you need all of this. And then what do the earthworms and dung beetles do? They help and assist in bringing the top residues back into the soil that feeds the biology. So this is a very dynamic cycle. And so then, therefore, this concept here referred to as earth castle, where all these microbes live in, this you will find in any healthy ecosystem. So remember the pecan orchard, the vineyard, the vegetables, the grazing up in the mountains, right? The farming in the desert. Do you think they have all of these components or compartments? They all did. So see, it didn't matter the elevation, it didn't matter the soil type, it didn't matter the depth, it didn't matter the water quality, it didn't matter the irrigation system. It mattered that you restored the life back to the soil, and then you used locally knowledge to modify it, to enhance it. So can everyone see that if you're looking at healthy ecological systems, anywhere in the world where farmers are doing this, you're going to find rhizosphere roots make aggregates make the soil porous. The system will automatically put a living roof over it, and it'll bring back organisms like earthworms and what have you, and then it's in a dynamic cycle. So that is the integration of soil health, where you bring in all the sciences to converge in a living system. It's much easier to understand soil physics, soil chemistry, soil biochemistry, microbiology. Much easier to understand pollinators, wildlife habitat, if you understand it from a soil health, because then you'll understand the role that a living soil plays to have the rest of the story. And many times when we're teaching in the sciences, at any level, we tend to forget that our folks frustrate. I've seen this many times where if we covered soil chemistry and I'm looking at these soil tests for irrigation, salinity, or biology, I have worked with folks, some of them that have masters and PhDs, and say, you know what, I could never understand that chemistry class. I just basically survived it. I don't even know what to do. But if I understand chemistry and all this stuff from this perspective, you know what it is? Now all of your parameters or your assessments are much easier to interpret, because now I gave it context. And that's the main thing that I wanted to cover in this thing here, is that if at any time you fail to give context to the way you're looking at your system, you're studying biology or whatever, if you don't give it context, you'll say, well, how does this apply to a global thing? What does it have to do with a living globe, clean air, clean water? How does that affect people's nutrition, healthy air, and all that stuff, right? Everything is directly, indirectly, all of it goes back to the soil. It is the integrator of all science. If it's not a biological living system, you don't have a healthy planet. You can't. You could not have there's no such thing as a healthy planet if the soil is not healthy, and it's dependent on human beings to have the right perspective. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
It's awesome to talk about all the ways that people make soil healthy, but how do you get started? How do you find the crops to plant and figure out what kind of irrigation is best for, say, like your front yard? You want to make the soil in your front yard healthy, starting from
Okay.
almost dead soil.
So, no matter what soil type and what have you, our agency that we work with, I work for the Soil Health Division, but the NRCS local field office, they have maps of all the soil types and properties of physical and chemical for all the soil. So when you go visit with them or you Google on it, you can use one of our programs there. You put in your address or whatever, you can zoom on it and it'll give you your soil types. You gotta know whether it's a coarse sandy soil, a clay soil, or a combination of other soil types, right? And so you gotta start from a planting part. But the rest of the pieces on it, like drip irrigation, fabric mulch, compost, and manure, the rest are nothing but the pieces coming together that work on any soil type. Remember I showed you all these things? All these things that I showed you were on all the different soil types and were on the worst of the soil types. The reason I showed was the desert soils in Arizona, the vineyard, sandy calcareous soils in the vineyard, and the mountains way up in Cuba, shallow, very rough soils. They're the hardest soils to fix. All the other soils are much easier to fix because they have inherent and dynamic properties that allow you to bring into condition to much higher levels. So it's just a matter of planning, and we have an enormous amount of resources on the National Soil Health Division website. It'll walk you through all this stuff. I'm only giving you a condensed version of 30 years of what we've learned and what I grew up doing all my life as a little kid. And so my always goal is that after you leave these classes, could you say, I know the basic principles and the basic concepts of this complex system, right? And you say, yeah. You don't have to know it at 99% of clarity of the organisms, but at least I have enough sense to apply this on the land, even if I cannot describe 99% of the organisms. See where I'm getting at? This is not one where you have to have advanced knowledge to make common sense decisions. This is understanding principles. Okay? So I'm gonna cover this briefly, and then I'm gonna leave it up. I might have to put a few more quarters there because it ends at 11:40. But I actually you let me know where we're at. I don't.
Yeah, the clock's over here, so,
How are we doing?
like 20 minutes.
Okay, 20 minutes. I think we can cover on it, and then you tell me how you want to go with this on it. So I'm going to now do a wrap-up session and say, hey, we covered a lot of territory, right? And we covered the principles. We gave you New Mexico examples in the desert. This is one of the hardest climates to make this happen. Almost anywhere else, it's way easier because you don't have all the headaches we have. Drought, salinity, lack of water, water rights, high pH, calcareous soils, shallow soils, soils low in organic matter. Every problem that you can think of in New Mexico in the desert, we have. You have to overcome all of them. But did we not show one way or another that if you apply the principles, even on the worst soils, they come to life? Right? Okay. So then, recap. Diversity, everyone thumbs up. You can't do this without diversity. And all the pollinators and beneficials and all that, right?